On this episode of Newt's World, he was on his way to stardom with a career as a 6-time heavyweight champion. Then an attack sidelined his aspirations and his boxing future. David Nino Rodriguez was an undefeated boxer with a knockout punch, headed for the heavyweight championship of the world, until an attempted murder left him with hundreds of stitches in his throat, a permanently scarred face, and a broken spirit. In his book, When the Lights Go Out, From Survivor to Champion, David describes his journey back from the brink of despair. With a no-holds-barred style that reflects his boxer's craft, he reveals the turbulent past that pushed him not only to the forefront of his sport, but also into destructive behavior, addiction, and thoughts of suicide, and ultimately to redemption as an advocate for bullied kids. I am really pleased to welcome my guest, David Nino Rodriguez. He is the executive producer and host of Nino's Corner podcast. David, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
That's an honor and a privilege, Newt. Thank you for having me.
First, for the listeners who may not know you, let's talk about your nickname, Nino. How did you get it?
Well, it was El Nino, okay? So basically, they were doing write-ups about me as a kid when I was like 9 years old in the El Paso Times and the El Paso paper, this upcoming kid with all this talent. I was attracting crowds at a very young age to watch me box, and they called me, El Nino or El Güero. I look like a white boy. So it was El Nino, but they would used to write that in the papers, and I didn't know how to say it properly. I would say Nino. So that stuck with me my entire career. Trust me, I wanted something a little more threatening, but the kid is all I got. So,
Well, then you became the threat once you were in the ring.
Once I was in the ring, it was game over. Yeah, I called myself the calculated killer.
Why do you think you were so good so early?
I think it was because my dad put me into boxing at a very young age. At 5 years old, I was picked on a lot as a kid. But, people know in the 70s and 80s, when you're a kid, you get to just run the streets. You just come home when the lights come on. And I was always out on the neighborhood, so I was constantly getting picked on and beat up as a kid. And my dad just said he had enough of it, and he just took me to the boxing gym, tough love, and left me there. And the boxing gym was in the ghetto, and he just left me there. And my uncle was a trainer for the Fort Bliss Army team. And he saw me and just started training me at a very young age. And let me tell you, I was petrified. I was scared. I was terrified because in my first visions of boxing, the first thing I saw were these kids in the ring blooding each other up, boxing, sparring really hard. These two little ghetto kids, Mexican kids, fighting each other. And I wanted no part of this, man. I wanted out of there. There was nowhere to go. I had to stay. And it was just tough love from my dad. I went under the tutelage of Tom McKay and Rocky Galarza, and they started training me at 5 years old, and I developed a left hook from hell, and I just took off with it. I ran with it. It was my way to overcome my demons, I guess you could say.
When you got in the ring, how did you feel? I mean, what were the emotions as you watched your opponent get in and you watched the ref? What did it feel like as a young kid to be right there?
Terrified. When I first started fighting amateur, I was terrified. I was terrified all the way into the pros too, because it's a scary, you're stepping into the unknown. You really don't, even though you trained your ass off and you worked very hard, you really don't know what's going to happen when you get into that ring. And it's a flood of different emotions. Like when you're leaving the dressing room into that tunnel and the curtains open up and then you're heading into the ring, you're walking on clouds. I don't feel my legs. I don't know how I'm going to be able to take a punch. I have all these doubts flooding my mind. Am I ready? Did I do enough? Everything's just a blur. I can't believe I'm getting in the ring. Then you walk up those steps. Your whole team walk in with you. You're under these bright lights. And then all of a sudden, everybody gets out. You're alone. And you're looking across. And it's all of a sudden the most quiet place on the planet. Even though the crowd's going wild, even though you can hear the roar from the crowd, all of a sudden, it's just the most quiet, peaceful place for me. Even though my nerves and butterflies are going everywhere, it's just the most surreal place you could ever be. It's the battlefield, right? And it's just you and the other guy. And honestly, that's what it took that type of lifestyle is what it took to take me out of my depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. I mean, was that type of atmosphere was the ring.
So your dad and your uncle played a real role in making you outstanding at an early age.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it wasn't much my choice, though. It was kind of like my dad just dropped me off there. I don't really know how to say it except that he told me I'm not going to raise a coward. And although I was in the boxing gym, I was still getting picked on quite a bit from the bigger kids because they found out I was boxing and all this. And it just ensued up until my junior high years to when I finally started fighting back. And then I turned into the bully. I turned into the guy that I didn't want to be. And I started finding these guys and beating them up and becoming the bully, the guy that I turned into, that rabid dog, that junkyard dog that I knew. I wanted to make sure nobody ever messed with me again in my life. And I started becoming a big man. So I was 6'3", 6'4" in high school, and I had a little man's complex. So go figure. The small man complex.
So it's sort of like in your head you were still 6, but in your body you are now an adult.
I'm still like that. Till this day, I have a small man's complex. I was picked on so much as a kid that it stayed with me my entire life.
I'm fascinated because you went to Catholic school, but the challenge wasn't that you couldn't learn, whatever the modern normal attitude about boxers is. The challenge was that thanks to your mother, you were learning faster than the school. That's a fascinating twist.
My mom started teaching me to read like at 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. I was sounding out words and reading, and I was reading on a college level by the time I was in 3rd grade. And I would sit there in class and just be bored to death as the other kids were sounding out words and trying to get through a sentence. And whenever they would pick on me to read, I would just real fast. It was just completely boring to me. So I started getting in trouble. I started throwing spit wads at teachers and just trying to create things to just keep my mind occupied. And I was constantly going to the principal's office, constantly going to confession. I had to go see the priest for confession, and I got more of an adrenaline rush from just getting in trouble. So that became my high. I was always like, okay, what can I do today to piss off the teacher so I can go to the principal and hang out with the principal? Because I liked the principal. He was my friend. And we'd talk in the principal's office, and he would always like, show me the shoe shine, show me some punches, and I'd work out in his office, and we were friends. And so that's what my life was like all the way up to junior high. And then in junior high, I just got in so much trouble. In my 8th grade year, I got kicked out of 4 different schools. I was in ISS and I was an alternative. I was expelled. Then that led me into high school to where I dropped out. When I got my GED, I got my GED in like 2 days. The GED teacher was like, you see all these kids in this classroom? They're all studying for the GED. And I was like, well, that's stupid. Why don't they just go to school? He's like, exactly. You should go to school. You just passed the GED, had one of the highest test results in the last 10 years. He goes, what's wrong with you? Why don't you get back to school? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, I don't want to be in school. I want to be a fighter, and that's what I'm going to do. I knew what I was going to do, and that's what I chose to do. And I went right into training camp right when I left, and I got my GED. I gave my dad my GED. I said, Dad, here you go. He was so disappointed. I felt really bad about that. But I went on to follow my aspirations as a professional fighter.
So in that process, you go to the San Juan Recreation Center and boxing gym. How big a influence on your life was that?
It was massive because that area of El Paso was very ghetto. It's a lot of projects, a lot of poor kids. And I always called, and even though I was just middle class, I mean, all of them said I was the rich white boy, blah, blah, blah. I got picked on a lot, and I wanted to prove I was just as tough as any of those kids. But I was bigger than everybody. And this is a true statement. And you can ask anybody that knew me when I was a kid growing up. When I was 12 years old, I had a deadly left hook at 12 years old. They were bringing in football players that played for the UTEP football team that were taking boxing camps, and they'd put them in the ring with me, and I would be knocking them out one by one. I mean, I'm talking snoring. I mean, these guys were huge football players, and I was just a 12-year-old kid, and I had a gift. I just had a gift with that left hook. So I got pleasure out of this. And next thing you know, I just decided this is what I want to do for my life.
Didn't it make some people jealous of you?
Oh, yeah. Especially in my 20s when I decided to turn pro and I started really knocking out guys. I thought I had a lot of friends. I had about 30, 35 friends that were always around me. I guess you could call them an entourage. Some were very close. We were like brothers, but later on in my career, I found out why they were really with me, why they were hanging out with me, their real motives, and it really bothered me. And I'll say to this day, I don't talk to any of them anymore, but I will say that I don't have many friends today, and I'm proud of that because I realized what a lot of people's intentions truly are, and I couldn't see it when I was young and dumb, doughy-eyed and bushy-tailed, whatever you want to call it, but I just couldn't see it then, and I see everything so much clearer now. But yeah, I had a lot of friends that were around me that were really out to get me.
One of the people who plays a really big role in saving your life is Officer Joe Sullivan. Tell us about that. It's a fascinating story.
I can't help but, did you read my book? Because a lot of people don't ask these detailed questions. So you're really digging deep here. I'm actually impressed. Yeah, he was a police officer and he was a boxer as well. He was a heavyweight fighter. And I remember he would always come to the calls. He would show up when I was in trouble, and he would show up with one of his partners, and they'd show up to a vandalism call or a disturbance or whatever. He would arrest me and he would arrest my friends, but then end up taking my friends to jail and dropping me off at home with my parents and giving them a long speech on why he dropped me off, this and that. But he would pick me up every day after school and take me to the boxing gym. He just felt like it was his responsibility. So every day after school, I'd get picked up 3:30 at the bell. This was before I dropped out, by the way. And he would pick me up in the cop car and drive me all the way to the boxing gym. Everyone thought I was getting arrested every day. And he would take me all the way to the boxing gym and train with me. And I got to say, he played a pivotal role in my life. I owe a lot to that man. And I'm still in touch with him till this very day. He is a solid, solid guy. And I owe a lot to him.
Now, there's a key point where you finally decide that San Juan is not everything you need, and you go to Rocky's Bar and Gym. What was Rocky's Bar and Gym?
It was off Alberta Street, off Reynolds in El Paso. It's under the underpass. It was under a bridge. It was in the ghetto, and it was a bar. It was called Rocky's Bar. Well, outside the bar was a boxing gym. So basically, you have all the drunks, the neighborhood drunks, getting wasted in the bar, and then outside was the boxing gym. Well, the way they groomed me and built me up as a fighter was Rocky. God rest his soul, by the way, he passed away. He was murdered. He was murdered in his house by a woman, an ex-girlfriend, blew his head off. The way he would train me was he'd go get the drunks in the bar, bring them outside, put them in the ring with me, and have me knock them out. And he would make bets with them inside the bar that they couldn't hang with that kid, that 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid outside. And they'd come out and they'd put the gloves on and they'd get in the ring with me and I'd drop them. I mean, I used to have a really good time doing this because these guys just did not know how to fight and they were drunk. So it was really quite easy. He would give me fresh meat. He would just send the next drunk guy over and I would beat him up for Rocky and then I'd go hit the bags, and I got a knack for knocking people out. I couldn't imagine something like that happening today, but back then it was all fair game.
So he's having a big influence on you. Then he gets killed. And as I understand it, you really fall into a depression.
Yeah, because he was my mentor and he was like a father figure to me. And I loved Rocky a lot. And he did a lot for me, for building me up. I went to go train one day and he wasn't there. I would always open up the gate and go in the back where the gym's at. And he's usually there with a stopwatch, just ready to meet me and get me going and get me warmed up. And he wasn't there. So sometimes he would go to like a fruit stand or the grocery store and grab an orange or an apple. And he'd be peeling it while I was wrapping my hands or shadow boxing. And he'd be watching me and mentoring me while I was getting ready or warming up. And he wasn't there that day. And I thought it was very strange. So I was looking all over the bar. I was yelling his name. I couldn't get a response. He lived in the house right next to the bar. So I walked over there, rang the doorbell, tried to open the door. It was locked. And I just was very confused. His car was outside. I just didn't understand what was going on. And so I went ahead and I can't remember if I got in a workout by myself or I just left, but I think I probably got in a workout by myself. And I just left very confused. Like, this is not Rocky. This is not what Rocky does. And I get home, and then the next thing I see, he's on the news that he was murdered. So I rush over to his house, and there's yellow tape all over the house. There's cops outside of his house. I see him on the gurney, and he's covered in a blanket, and I just couldn't believe what I was witnessing. And he got his head blown off by a jealous girlfriend. I think she was like an ex-barmaid or something like that, just was jealous and just blew his head off with a shotgun.
So how did you deal with the depression that set in after the killing of your friend?
Well, at that point, I was already very depressed. Boxing was the only thing that really relieved my depression. I don't know if it was something that was genetic, but I was always dealing with depression as a kid. It really started at 13 years old. I was in severe depression. That's when I met my next trainer, which was Louis Burke, who's had many world champions and was a contender himself. I went and sparred at a gym or something, and he saw me and he saw my talents, and he said, "I'd love to work with you." And I said, "Absolutely." And I started going to see Louis Burke up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I'd drive there every day to get the work in, to get the training in. And then when he saw that I was dedicated, Louis took it as a full-time job to start training me. And Louis Burke is ultimately the one that turned me professional. So Louis definitely took me to the next level after Rocky Galarza was murdered. It was Louis Burke that really took me to that next level. And the biggest regret I have today was leaving Louis Burke in the prime of my career because I thought I knew too much or whatever it was, and we had disagreements. But my biggest regret was leaving Louis Burke because he was a hell of a trainer, man.
You came up in part through the Golden Gloves program. In your mind, is that a pretty good program?
Yeah, I mean, I think the program is really failing the youth right now. I don't think a lot of kids are boxing like they used to. Obviously, UFC and MMA has really taken hold, and a lot of kids are doing that now. But I think the base for any kid to learn how to fight is boxing and wrestling. I mean, I think you got to learn those two arts in order to really get a solid foundation. But the Golden Gloves back then was stellar. It was very competitive. There was a lot of kids in it. Highly competitive. My first amateur fight actually was against the junior Olympic champion, and I knocked him out in the second round, first 10 seconds of the second round, and that's when I knew, man. That's when everyone knew. That kid had 300 fights, and that was my first fight, and I knocked him out, and everyone knew from that day forward, man, this kid's going to go places. So it was really just an amazing time in my life to just know that I had all these aspirations and all these dreams ahead of me.
What was the big challenge in moving from amateur boxing to becoming a professional?
It wasn't a big challenge for me. Actually, if I would have stayed in amateurs, I probably would have got more experience, but I didn't have the style for the amateurs. It was more of a point system, and a lot of these kids were real busy and really fast. I had more of a stalking, plotting system and style that once I hit you, it was over. And they felt that when I went with my manager, Bob Spagnola, and Louis Burke, they thought they could groom me and maneuver me into the right fights and step up the ladder the correct way and build up experience as a professional. So professional is different in the sense that the gloves are 10 ounce, sometimes 6 ounce. If you're fighting in Mexico, no headgear. It's a lot more brutal. But I think actually amateurs can be a little more difficult if you stay in it long enough. A lot of people that stay in the amateurs too long keep that style throughout the pros, and they never develop into a really good pro. But for me, I had about 20 amateur fights and went right into the pros, and they developed me. They thought it would be better to develop me through the professional process, through the ranks, than just get a bunch of fights in the amateurs. So that's the decision I decided to make, and that's what we made.
You had a real career developing and real potential. And then in 2011, you get attacked outside of a bar in El Paso, Texas. Did you have any idea this was coming?
Believe it or not, it wasn't in El Paso. It was in Phoenix, Arizona. It was in Scottsdale, of all places. But, and I don't play victim to this. That year, 2011, was very turbulent for me because I was 36-0. I had a lot of pressure on my plate. I just broke up with my team, which I regretted fully. It was like we were not talking anymore. I went with a new team. I just got done with a win against, I think his name was Hicks, Mike Hicks or something like that. And I knocked him out in the first or second round, and I remember I was out and I overdosed on drugs. This happened twice in 2011, a very turbulent year for me. 2011, February, I was at a bar or a club in Dallas. I was partying with my friends, and at this time, I was really juggling different extremes. I was juggling alcoholism, drugs, and being a professional fighter. And if you know, it's like oil and water. It doesn't mix. I was burning the candle at both ends. So I'm at this bar and I'm partying and I'm doing everything with my friends and I'm taking all these drugs. I'm taking Adderall. I'm taking a handful of Vicodin. I'm drinking alcohol. And all of a sudden I drink this stuff called GHB, which is a very potent drug. And that was it. That's all I remember. And for 9 to 10 hours of my life, I have no recollection. I just heard from a third party that I was dragged out by the bouncers. I was thrown in the alley. They didn't want the liability of a death inside the club. And in the alley, a nurse that was off duty went and got my friends and said, you better take him to the hospital or I'm going to blame you. I'm going to tell his family you all didn't do it. He'll be blamed for his death. They raced me through the highway to the hospital. I got to the hospital, and all I remember is waking up and seeing all these doctors standing over me saying, we got him back, we got him back. And there was like a crew of like 8 or 9 doctors all standing over me. Looks like I was abducted by aliens or something. I just see this bright hospital light, and then I'm looking up and I'm like, where the hell am I? And then I remember the most telling thing in all of that was the doctor's like, man, we almost lost you. And I looked at him and I said, should have just let me go. And I threw my hands up and like I was very pissed. I was mad. I just said, you should have just let me go. And then they called Suicide Watch, and they had nurses stand over me and watch me. I was in the hospital for 8 days. I think I was in ICU for like 2 or 3 days, but then in the hospital, regular hospital room for another 4 days. And that was the beginning of the year of 2011. Then I went off and won 2 more belts. I knocked out Owen Beck, and then I knocked out Byron Pauly. Then after Byron Pauly, I was like, now we're in the sights of a heavyweight championship of the world to fight Klitschko or someone like that. We are right there. We're getting offers. We're sending in offers. We're getting counter offers. And the world's ready to open up for me. And for some reason, I just felt more pressure than I ever have in my life. And I'm juggling all the extremes, remember? So after the Byron Pauly fight in December, so if that happened in February, in December after the Byron Pauly fight, I go out with my friends once again because I'm getting ready to go back to training camp to train for a much tougher fight. And I'm out in Scottsdale, and of course I'm on drugs, and I'm drinking again, walking out of a bar. And I know there had to have been an altercation in the bar, and I don't remember exactly what it was because I was 3 sheets to the wind. As I'm walking out, I hear footsteps behind me, faster and faster and faster. And then I turn around, and next thing you know, I'm surrounded by about 4 or 5 men. And one of the guys says, hey, man, I just want to shake your hand. I'm swaying back and forth because I'm so drunk. I stick out my hand to shake his hand, and out of my peripheral vision, I see like how a fish would see a fishing lure. I saw something silver shine, and as I tilt my head up, boom, and I just feel my whole jaw get slit open from my ear all the way through my throat up into my lip. And I leaned over, and all my blood just starts pouring out of my neck. And I thought right then and there, I'm dead. This is it. It's over. I just got killed. And I see one of my friends out of my peripheral vision come running up going, what's going on here? And I hear all these screams and yells. And then all of a sudden he lifts his arms up, and they started viciously stabbing him in the arm. He falls on top of me, and I remember like he got stabbed 3 or 4 times in the arm and shoulder, and he didn't even care. He was looking at me. He's like, don't die on me, Dave. Don't die. And next thing you know, I wake up, I'm in the ambulance, and blood is all over the EMS. I saw worry on their face, and I don't know why I did this, but I did. I stopped and I said, hey, guys, please calm down. I'm clean. Because I knew my blood was all over them. And they looked, I don't know, I just thought that was the right thing to say, and then I blacked out, and that was it. That's all I remember. I wake up a day and a half later, and I have 369 stitches in my face, and a cosmetic surgeon just happened to be on call that night that was there to fix my face the way he did. But little did I know, they didn't take my life that night, but they definitely took my career, and I wouldn't find that out till later.
How long did it take you to recover? I mean, it sounded like a pretty terrible wound.
I mean, physically, I guess a year, but emotionally, I'm still recovering, to be honest. I don't remember their faces. They never got caught.
So here you are now. You've been beaten up, scarred, almost killed, but you decide to go back to boxing.
Yeah, the WBC had me in the top 10 and the WBA. And like I said, I was getting positioned for a championship fight, and they put me on medical leave. I went out to Las Vegas, and I got with another whole different team. So I moved from 2 teams, and I got with a different team, and I signed with Main Events. And we thought it was to get me, I guess, a journeyman, a tune-up fight before I could get back in the ring again against a guy that's in the top 10. And they got me a guy named Johan something. He was 6'8", 6'9", big guy. So I'm getting ready for this fight. I'm sparring big men. I'm crouching down low. I'm exploding up, knocking guys out in the sparring. I'm looking really good. I'm ready for this fight. And then a week before the fight, he pulls out. And they come at me and they say, hey, he pulled out of the fight, but I was already in shape. I was ready to fight. And they go, we got a replacement for you. And that was Darnell Wilson. And I said, Darnell Wilson, man, this guy's 5'10". He's a completely different style than what I was training for. But I took the fight anyway because I didn't want to look like a coward. I was ready and I just wanted to fight. But I had so much emotional baggage and so much just distraught and frustration with my life. And just after being attacked with a knife, it took something out of my soul. I got into that ring with Darnell Wilson. I just felt everything was off. I just unleashed hell on him, and we had I think we had the fight of the year. We just were trading punches for 6 rounds straight. It was just a crazy fight. And then the last 10 seconds of the last round, you hear and boom, he caught me with the left hook, knocked me out. All I remember is waking up off the canvas, and I see him jumping up and down, and immediately I knew I lost. And let me tell you, that feeling was worse than getting stabbed in the throat for me. That feeling right there, knowing that I threw it all away, I blew it, was worse for me, so much more. And I cannot tell you how I felt after that. My whole life was just like a nuclear bomb went off. And I tried to come back on another fight, got knocked out in that fight as well. I wasn't recovered from the last fight. So now I'm 36-2, no longer 36-0, and my whole life is just gone. And everything I've ever worked for since I was a kid just blew up in my face. Then I get back in the ring. I win the last fight, but I throw my back out, which needed emergency back surgery. So all these things just aligned. And, ultimately the end of my career was 37-2 with, I think, 35 knockouts, 25 in the first round. But I still hold the record for the most first-round knockouts. But I could have done a lot more, and I have to say, I blame it on my drug and alcohol problem that I had.
So how hard was it for you to go through withdrawal and to function without the dependence on the drugs?
Well, those were always just an escape. I was going through so much in boxing and so much in my life that I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't have the right, I don't know what you would say. I just mentally there was just so much pressure on me. I just didn't know how to handle it. It was just too much. I didn't know I was going to be this undefeated prospect. And I don't understand. I was just, every time I drank or did drugs, it was an escape from reality. I was having a good time with my friends. I was womanizing, doing all of it, what young guys do, and I thought I had all the time in the world, I guess. I just didn't, and I just live and learn, I guess. Father time is undefeated.
So you turned from that, though, you took those lessons, and you've really focused your life on helping children who were bullied. Talk to us about that.
Well, a friend saw me in the gym. I stopped going to the boxing gym and I went to the weightlifting gym. And there was a guy there. His name's Sal Montelongo. God rest his soul. He just passed away last year. He was my age and he was a professional basketball player in Mexico. And he would see me coming to the gym and he came up to me and he goes, Dave, I can tell you're depressed. He goes, you got to do something, man. He goes, come with me in my program and help me help kids. And I was like, man, I'm nobody to help anybody. I don't want to help anybody. What am I going to say? I'm a loser. I'm a failure. He's like, no, you're the champ. You're El Paso's champ. You got to go talk to the kids. And I was like, that's for someone else. And he kept bugging me every day. And it was to the point that I was like, oh, I'd see the guy and I'd go the other direction. And I was just like, oh, gosh, here he comes. And he come walking up to me, hey, champ, have you made up your mind? I'm like, dude, you bother me so much. I'm going to do it one time. One time I'm doing this for you, and then leave me alone. I did it one time, and it just grew on me. And let me tell you, I showed up to the school in front of an audience of about 2,000 kids, and I got this strange little, like, return of an adrenaline rush. Nothing like boxing, but something like that resembled it a little bit. And I smelled like a liquor cabinet because I was out drinking the night before. And I got up there and I started talking about how I was bullied as a kid, and the kids started laughing at my stories. And then I could see the kids that were in the audience that were being picked on. And I knew I was resonating with them. And all of a sudden, it just took a life of its own. And I was like, you know what, Sal? I go, I'm going to do this again, man. You got it. I'm going to do. And I wasn't making any money at this. I was broke. I was living on a couch. But I had my only suit in the closet I'd put on and go out there and talk to these kids. I'd take it to the dry cleaners every day, every 3 days to get the same suit cleaned, and get out to the schools and talk to these kids. And all of a sudden I felt this satisfaction from it. And then the next thing you know, I'm feeling like, man, I feel like a hypocrite. Here I am showing up hungover to talk to these kids on how they need to change their life and how I was bullied. And here I am, a drunk, talking to these kids. But that was really the first step towards my sobriety, to be honest with you.
In that sense, the kids were helping you change as much as you were helping them.
They were helping me much more. Much more.
I'm curious about two things. One, what kind of role does your faith play? You went to a Catholic school system. Does it matter?
Well, I was always a big believer in God, and I still am to this day. In fact, I believe more in Christ than I ever have before. But during that time, I would say I was just a fair weather type of Christian. I was like, yeah, I know how to play the rosary. I know how to say the Our Father, the Hail Mary. And my consciousness, I thought, was just so much bigger than that. I was learning about all things, dimensional and interdimensional travel and aliens. And I was watching Ancient Aliens and Sacred Geometry. And I was into all this stuff. And I was just really just a believer of all things, but not certain in one, until recently, by the way. But I don't know. But I always believed in a higher calling. I always believed in God. And that's really, although I was completely depressed and completely blackness, I still had, even though the fire was completely out in my soul, I still had a little coal that was burning. And I knew that if I could just stoke that, I could return somehow. Now, I really thought in my mind it would be boxing, but it turned out not to be boxing. But I still had that small remnant of a coal burning in my chest that I could still be something. And that's the only faith I had, was God was going to see me through this rough and terrible, turbulent time.
Your podcast is Nino's Corner. It's on Rumble. It's on Nino's Corner TV. It's on YouTube. And I understand you get like 80 million views a year. How did you get into the podcast business?
It was a complete accident. So this is how God works, right? I was newly sober. I just decided in 2019, on the 26th, December 26th, 2019, I was at a bar and I was looking at my friends and I was about to commit suicide. I really felt, I already wrote my book. The book was mainly for my family. I wanted them to really just know who I was before I took myself out. I was severely depressed. I was so depressed, I remember that Thanksgiving that they had to pull me out of the bar to take me to Thanksgiving dinner. And then when I got to Thanksgiving dinner, they kicked me out of the house because I was so drunk. That's just the way my life was. And, well, it turned out. December 26th of 2019, I just got out of the hospital for heart problems due to drinking and cocaine and Adderall, the whole thing. And I had a afibrillation. And December 26th, that next month, I'm at the bar with my friends, and I just looked at them, and I thought to myself, wow, I really have not given God a chance. I've really never, if I do take myself out, and I'm just saying real talk here, have I ever really given God a chance? Have I ever really quit drinking? Did I ever really give that a chance? I mean, did I explore all options? And the answer was no. So I was at a bar with my friends and I was drinking, and I looked at them and I looked at the mirror behind the bar and saw myself. And I said to myself, first, I don't want to be like these guys in 5 years. And then I looked at myself in the mirror in my reflection and I go, wow, this is who I am now. And I put the beer down and I said, if I don't leave right now, right here, I'll continue drinking for the rest of my life and I will die a drunk. I waved at them and I walked out of the bar and said, I'm out of here, guys. And I never returned ever again. Now, fast forward 3 months later, I'm freshly sober. I'm in my backyard and I'm doing Facebook Lives. And as I'm doing Facebook Lives, I'm just candidly talking like I am to you, just talking. And I got like maybe 3,000 people on a live, 5,000 people just listening to me go on and on about my sobriety. And I was really the first one to kick the door open for this. Right before 2020 hit, the movie Out of Shadows came out, the documentary. And it was right at the same time I started talking about pedophilia and the problem that's within Hollywood and politicians and all this stuff. And I just laid into it, man. I just went all in. And it was the first time anybody really heard anything like that. And it went viral. Like, I had no idea that video was going to do anything at all. So I'm sitting there. I turn off my Facebook Live. Like I said, 3,000 people. By the end of the night, it usually gets 5,000, 10,000 views. And by the end of the night, I go back and check my Facebook, and I'm like, wait a minute, this can't be right. 200,000 views. Then next thing you know, I'm like, 500,000 views. I was like, what's going on here? Next thing you know, I'm putting my phone down and I'm putting it on the dresser and the notifications are going off and it's going killing my battery because I'm getting so many notifications. Now I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm dead. They're going to come after me, whoever the hell I pissed off. And I'm sitting there just sweating bullets. I remove it off Facebook, but it's already been copied and pasted everywhere. So it's all over Instagram. It's all over everywhere. And it gets millions of views to the point that it's getting translated in Chinese and German and all these other languages. And people are sending this to me. And I'm like, oh, I have people that I haven't talked to in a decade calling me saying, dude, do you really say this? I'm like, oh my God. It was a complete accident. Okay. This was not something I planned. It was a complete accident. And then from there, I was like, I can either run from this or pray about it. I prayed about it. And I was like, I either run from this or embrace it. I decided to embrace it. I started going on shows. Next thing you know, I'm buying a computer. I never had a computer. And I'm plugging in a mic. I'm buying a mic. I'm buying a light. Next thing you know, I'm like doing podcasts. And I swear it just happened like that. Nothing ever was planned. I didn't plan any of this, if you want to know the truth. I didn't sit down with a pen and paper and say, how am I going to be a podcaster? I had no desire to be a podcaster. I had no desire to do any of this. It just took off on its own and created a life of its own.
Well, it's an amazing story, and people can go to Nino's Corner. You know, you're really a remarkable person in that you have sort of lived your life as opposed to planning and being in the shadows and what have you. I admire your courage, and no matter what happened, you got up and put another foot forward and kept trying.
I was a risk taker, and I just thought you get more taking a risk than not. And it's just like gambling. You got to go in there willing to win big, but you got to be willing to lose big. And if you lose big, you got to come back and try again.
You have a fascinating American story. People have the opportunity, if they have the courage and they're willing to put in the time and effort. Amazing things can happen, and you're an example. You know, Dave, I want to thank you for joining me. Your book, When the Lights Go Out, is a great read. It's available now on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere. Your podcast, Nino's Corner, can be found on Rumble, at Nino's Corner TV, and on YouTube. You're really an amazing guy, and this has been a remarkably fun conversation.
I appreciate it, Newt. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a privilege. When I found out I was going to be on with the great Newt Gingrich, I was like, this is cool. I'm going somewhere. Looks like I'm going somewhere.
Thank you to my guest, David Nino Rodriguez. You can get a link to buy his book, When the Lights Go Out, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, Listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.